Welcome to Government Speak. This is where we'll cut through the government speak to get the information you need about county programs, services, and events straight from the source. Welcome to Government Speak, Contra Costa County's official podcast. I'm your host, Kristi Jourdan, Contra Costa County's Public Information Officer. And on this episode, we have Conservation and Development Director Jourdan Kopchik joining us in studio today. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So it might actually be easier to start off our conversation talking about what DCD doesn't do. But for purposes of folks who might not be as well versed with the Conservation and Development Department, can you describe briefly what it is and how you impact the day-to-day?
Yeah, so building permitting is the bulk of our permitting, and we do as many as 15,000 building permits a year in the unincorporated area of the county, which if the unincorporated area of the county was a city, it would be the largest city by population and by area in the whole county. But also 5 cities we provide that function for as well. And so that's making sure that all new construction follows the California Uniform Building Code, which makes sure that it's earthquake safe, but also make sure that there's egress in case of emergency and that there's, for commercial buildings, there's accessibility for disabled, et cetera. So it's a very important function. That's one of the key things. But also zoning. So that's and that's only for the unincorporated area. If someone wants to come in and do a subdivision or change a use, we apply the zoning code. So we do about 1,000 permits under our zoning code each year. So those sort of our key permitting function. We also do a lot of code enforcement, though. So when folks don't follow the zoning or building code, then we get complaints and we deal with that.
That kind of leads into, what can you do on your property? If there was a takeaway that you wanted folks listening to remember, what would you want them to know before they, try to start a project on their property?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that if it's a small amount of construction that they probably don't need a building permit, but that's almost certainly not true. Most forms of construction of any kind require a building permit. It's important to make sure that it's for the safety of the property owner and the safety of people that use the property that all construction follows the code. So putting in a new deck, small things you might think, they definitely require a building permit. It's only very minor things like retaining walls less than 3 feet tall. It's a very short list of things that don't need a building permit. So I think the one thing I would say as a takeaway is if you're doing construction, please check with your contractor or check in with us about getting a building permit.
Shifting gears here, we have addressed on the podcast previously what the general plan is. But if someone missed that episode, what is the general plan and how does your department play a role in updating the general plan?
Yeah, so the general plan is kind of the land use constitution for a local agency. So for Contra Costa County, our general plan provides the land use vision for how we want our county to develop and not develop for the next generation. And our current general plan was really written in the early 90s. It's been updated a little bit since then, but we're in the process of doing a big update to it now. And it's really a chance for many of the planners in our department. It's a once-in-a-career opportunity to kind of do real earnest planning to try and chart a vision in cooperation with, of course, the supervisors, but also with the public who heavily engage in this to say, what do they want Contra Costa County to look like in 20 years? And so we use the general plan to kind of chart our course to having a better Contra Costa County in the future.
Whose vision is it? And how do people participate in that?
Yeah, it's the collective vision. And it's been a 6-year process. And so we've had hundreds of meetings, and people have an opportunity to participate through attending those meetings at the community scale, at the board scale, at the planning commission level, through their municipal advisory commission. Most unincorporated communities have one of those. There's also ways to participate online. So there's a website for the project, and all the documents are up there, and there's ability to comment on it either through a letter or through other ways, online commenting ways. So we really feel like the current draft we're working on reflects a whole lot of really valuable public input. And so we try to do the best we can. Sometimes it doesn't, it's not consistent with each other. One person may say turn left and the other says turn right. But generally, we're able to kind of build on the insightful comments we have from people that live here about what they want it to look like.
Part of that discussion is also around housing. So, what are some of the efforts that the department's working on to try to provide more affordable housing and address some of the homelessness crisis?
Good question. It's tricky because we are not a housing provider. We aren't. Our agency is not responsible for building buildings and renting them out, and we're not a public housing agency. And there are other agencies that do that, but there's never enough money to meet the housing need, it seems. So one of the main challenges in our state, and certainly our region and our county, is just having enough supply. And so we have what's called a housing element. It's basically a chapter in our general plan that has to meet state goals and local goals. And so we have they set a number of how many housing units we need to produce in the next 8 years. And so what we do is through that planning process try and identify the spaces where they can go. So we can't just say, sure, we want more housing without doing the difficult work of trying to figure out where to site it. Now, when we provide eligibility, but we aren't the people with the hammers and the nails out there building it. So we identify vacant lots, we identify corridors that could be have denser housing, and we set our policies to try and encourage that. But it's still, at the end of the day, it requires the private property owners who want to build it to come into us and work with us to build it. We also have funding programs. So for a long time, we've administered state and federal programs that help subsidize the construction of affordable housing. But the county stepped up a few years ago, and the board, after the voters approved Measure X, the sales tax measure, the board allocated a significant chunk of that funding to what we call the local housing trust. And so that's about a $12 million fund each year that we use to help build affordable housing, but also we work with our partners in the Health Services Department to do homelessness crisis response. So that's in terms of work with unhoused folks to try and find a way to keep them housed before they become homeless and to find them interim housing and hopefully to connect them to permanent housing.
And you had mentioned Measure X funding, and we've also addressed that previously here, but just for folks who might not be aware, half-cent sales tax approved by voters a few years ago is meant for safety net, emergency response, law enforcement, housing, those types of services. So another aspect of the general plan addresses sustainability. This is something that your department definitely leads on. Can you talk a bit about some of the efforts that the DCD is working on when it comes to sustainability?
Sure. Yeah, it's a big new area of work and a big part of the conservation part of our department. And it's interesting the way in my tenure here that's shifted from mostly a focus, I would say, on open space protection and protecting natural lands, which is still ongoing and important, but was kind of a key focus then, has expanded to also address our role in climate change and what we can do to both make sure the county's doing its part to reduce emissions of pollutants that contribute to greenhouse gases, but also make sure that we're prepared to adapt to the consequences of climate change, which we already see happening. So we have a climate action plan. That's one of the documents that is on the Envision website people can check out, and it has a whole array of strategies to try and deal with that, from reducing, you'd be surprised actually that one of the main emission sources is solid waste. And so trying to reduce the amount of carbon and things that go into the landfill, which then oozes out into the environment, often in the form of methane, which is one of the worst greenhouse gases. So a lot of things related to that, related to try and reduce emissions from transportation, because that's a huge source. But also on the adaptation side, we've recently started work with partners, regional agencies and cities to try and figure out a resiliency plan for our shoreline cities and for the shoreline areas of the county, so that as sea levels rise, which they're projected to rise rather substantially, that we make sure that we have a plan to deal with that. And whether that's trying to use soft approaches like wetlands. Wetlands can be a good way to absorb the rising seas and to provide a buffer to communities, and also just trying to invest in other infrastructure to try and thwart the rising seas and protect communities that are already located around there. And also make sure we make wise land use decisions and not put more lives and structures at risk in areas where the seas are expected to go up.
What about the habitat conservation program? I know that that's an area of focus for you all, but when it comes to sustainability efforts, what is that program and how can folks actually see it in action?
Yeah, this is something that I worked on earlier in my career and still work on to this day. So in the history of Contra Costa County, one of the main growth patterns was what some people kind of derisively call sprawl, which I think is a fair characterization in some way, that the best place for growth to go, kind of the cheapest, was to keep sprawling out in kind of low density forms. And that's definitely not what we're trying to encourage more of. But there still needs to be some more of that growth. And so the county partnered with 4 cities and the East Bay Regional Park District and state and federal agencies to develop a program to try and make sure that that growth was directed in the places that would have the least conflict with natural resources, and be sure that as development happened, that it would pay its fair share towards conservation. So the county's been involved in this East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan for the last 17 years, although it took many years to write it. And that's basically an effort wherein we facilitate the endangered species permitting for these development projects, whether they're commercial projects or housing projects. And mitigation fees are collected, and also public funds are also invested in conserving land. And to date, I think we've acquired, with our partner, the East Bay Regional Park District, about 15,000 acres of land, which for a planner, I know that measurement, but for others, like New York Central Park is about 800 acres. So we've acquired more than 15 central parks in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And if folks they will be able to see it soon. So most of these lands are being added on. There are going to be new parks in the East Bay Regional Park District system out in East Contra Costa County primarily, around the cities of Brentwood and Oakley and Clayton and Pittsburgh. And so these natural preserves that are being set up for species will also be places that people can enjoy.
That sounds amazing. You addressed this previously a little bit, but we can dive a little deeper into it, I think, around code enforcement. That sounds intuitive. It sounds serious. It sounds like there are some negative aspects to it because it is complaint driven. What does a day in the life of that program look like? And then how do we work with property owners who might be on the receiving end of some of these complaints to resolve some of those issues?
Yeah, it's one of the most difficult jobs we have. And I will say that in my time at the department, I didn't always fully understand. I wasn't connected to the code enforcement group, and so I didn't have appreciation for just how difficult their job is. But in the past 10 years, I've become much more acquainted with it, and it's tricky. And I've joked with them that there should definitely be a code enforcement series on streaming someplace, because no day in the life of a code enforcement officer is ever the same. It's very unique, and the circumstances they encounter are sometimes funny, sometimes uncomfortable, but it's important work. The types of things that they try to work with property owners to get voluntary compliance. That's kind of the key. We get a lot of complaints each year from folks concerned about what they might see, building construction going on without permits, or people dumping on private property, these types of things. And so oftentimes property owners don't realize that they're violating. And so we try to, in a friendly way, give them a courtesy notice, and that's what we call it, and explain to them how what they're doing is violating the rules and what they can do to correct it, so that we don't have to take punitive action. So most everything is resolved through just kind of coaching, which is much more effective than having a heavy hand immediately. But sometimes the stronger tools are needed, and those are much more difficult situations. But that's the way we're able to protect neighborhoods sometimes from situations that shouldn't have been there at all. But yeah, illegal dumping is an interesting aspect of that. Code enforcement is just one component of that. But we work with law enforcement, both the sheriff's office, the district attorney's office, the health department, and public works department And the county's launched an illegal dumping initiative at the board's direction, and it's actually also funded with Measure X funding. And that's really trying to get ahead of the problem. We can't just clean up the illegal dumping. It will just never end. And so it's a multi-pronged strategy that starts with prevention and education. And in fact, we're about to start a media. We received a grant from the state, and we're using that to do an advertising campaign to make sure people understand what they can do if they see illegal dumping, that they can report it, because it's important that we enforce and that people who are consciously breaking the rules have consequences. But also, some people don't know that there's the right way to do things. Basically, every garbage service in our county has some way of disposing of bulky waste, or you can bring it to collection stations. And so there are ways to do it. Many of them are free and already included in the garbage service you're paying for. And so we just try and provide education to folks, and we're trying to clean up the garbage faster and do cleanup days. And the supervisor's office all work on community cleanup days to try and make sure there's a way for people to dispose of unwanted items and not have that end up in our creeks or on our roadsides or out in our wildlands.
Well, and beyond the environmental aspects, the damage that it can do, and just the general unsightliness in a community and the safety aspects of it, if none of those kinds of messages resonate, it's costly. It costs a lot of money to clean up the illegal dumping. So I know that there's also signage that went out throughout the county too. If folks want to report, how do they go about doing that?
Yes, if they see illegal dumping, they call 1-800-NO-DUMPING. Yeah, so that's what they would report that. And the sheriff's office, depending upon what community they're in, it could be, if they're in an incorporated, it could be the city, but they work to address that. And I will say that our law enforcement agencies have really stepped up in terms of prioritizing this. I mean, they obviously have to juggle a heavy load, like they have to balance life safety crimes with these other crimes. But I think it's reached a crisis proportion where folks are really upset, and it's not just one community in our county; it's throughout the county. Illegal dumping is really a problem, and so law enforcement is stepping up to try and help address it.
We've talked about some of the program areas that your department focuses on, and they run the gamut. I mean, there's such a wide range, but I think one of the most interesting stories about DCD is you. You've been, with the county for how many years? More than 30?
Not quite 30.
Not quite 30.
Not
okay.
quite 30.
But still, I mean, you started out as on the conservation side, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I started out as a part-time intern, working on our habitat conservation efforts and our creek and watershed conservation efforts, and a little bit also on our water agency. Did
you ever envision, working your way all the way up to running the department someday?
No, I absolutely did not envision that. At least I told my parents, it was a tough job market when I first got out of college. And so I was just so thrilled to have this internship because I was working part-time in a warehouse. And I thought this was just going to be one step in a career with varied experiences, but I ended up really loving it at the county and staying.
What brings you back every day? I mean, it's amazing to me, at least in the communications world, you kind of bounce all over the place at times, but I'm amazed at the number of county employees we have who've stayed 30, 40, 50 years in some instances. So for you, what is it about, Contra Costa County and public service? Yeah,
I am committed to public service. I enjoy my job because I'm surrounded by people who are also committed to public service. Compared to other counties that I've heard about, and I don't have experience, so I'm not the best witness on this, but I feel like the county provides people who want to work on public service a lot of autonomy to try and plug in and find ways that they can contribute. So that was my career, was basically my bosses at the county gave me liberties to work on a program area and to take that in a direction that we all thought would have the most benefit for the public. So it's been very rewarding. Not everything is successful, but it's been rewarding to work on programs that mature and become, meaningful contributors to improving the conditions in our county. So it's a really great place to work. I recommend it.
Me too. In the time that you've been with the county, are there any specific projects or key milestones that stand out to you?
Yeah, interesting. Well, when you first said that, I was thinking that one first milestone was like I didn't have email when I first started at the county. Not having to worry about the fax machine has been nice. But yeah, so the technological changes have been sort of stunning. I don't know. I think that one thing that people who aren't in government are frustrated by government about, and I understand this, is that things take time, right? I mean, permits take time, of course, and we try to make them as fast as possible. But big, long endeavors like trying to get a handle on illegal dumping, it's not that simple, right? And so one of the things that brings me back every day is trying to keep those things going and building on successes, because it's not going to be an overnight thing, and it kind of requires diligence, and it requires people who remember the lessons learned from other failed approaches. And so I find that to put a little fire in my belly to want to come to work and keep seeing those things through.
If folks have one takeaway from today's discussion, what would you want them to most remember? Whether it's about the work that DCD does or any other aspects of engaging local government.
When I talk to family and friends and neighbors, I don't think they have an understanding of the extent of work that happens behind the scenes and the ways in which there are so many opportunities for people to engage in government. And we often have public outreach efforts where we're trying to, we're about to have one about noise. We don't really regulate noise in neighborhoods, and people complain about that, and we're about to start a process to get people's thoughts about what can we do about these types of things. And I think many people don't realize how many avenues there are to plug in and have their voice heard. And I would say because so many people don't know about it, if you're one of the people that figures it out, you get to have a lot of input.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. We have folks who routinely show up for public comment at board meetings, and I mean, those opportunities are available. Well, great. Well, John, thank you so much for being on today's show. I'm your host, Kristi Jourdan, Contra Costa County's Public Information Officer. Thanks for joining us on Government Speak, Contra Costa County's official podcast, brought to you by the Office of Communications and Media. Don't just take our word for it, though. Stay curious, stay connected, and stay informed. Until next time, keep your mind open and your facts straight.